Okay, so we're going to look at an example of an essay. Remember that this is actually an essay that was done in time conditions. And when students look at essays, they usually are more critical than teachers are. I think what I do as an examiner is I tend to look at an essay and to try to catch the student being good and to understand them as much as possible. Now, straight away, and I know that Ruby over there believes this as well, that is a very long introduction, isn't it? So the first thing I'd say is it doesn't need to be anything as long as that. I probably would choose a shorter introduction because I think if you don't write as fast as Ruby does, then you might be in danger of spending too much time doing an introduction. So I would say probably half that length is what most people would say. That said, it is a very good introduction. It's just that she's chosen to put more detail in than I would usually use, okay? When you start to use words like furthermore in your introduction, or moreover, or in addition, it's arguable that maybe it's better to put those into a main paragraph. Remember, the introduction, it's a bit like I always say, that when you go to America and you go to American Chili's and you have a starter, I don't know about you guys, I'm always full afterwards. And you don't want that to be like your introduction, do you? You just want it to be like a little first course that gets you hungry for the main course, okay? So she says here that she's going to use North and Requiem to agree with the title. Remember, we're looking at this idea of unending cycle. Don't forget to, when you look at the titles, always pick them apart. What does unending mean? There is no chance that it will ever stop. So that's going to be one of my key words that I like. You might argue that cycle means that anyway. Okay, I put it in just to really make sure the students knew what I meant. And then you might say, is there a difference between violence and conquest? When you're given two words, it doesn't necessarily mean they're synonyms. So there might be a bit of a difference between violence and conquest. So just think about that as you do that. Then she's got the word conversely. Why do we like that? Because very clearly in the introduction, she's speaking to the examiner and saying, and I will use this other poem to show that this statement up here is too simplistic, too reductive, and that there might be a richer, more complex, and more holistic way of reading the poem, okay? And she says here, new song shows the influence of the past, which is history, the impact of the melodious, elucidating a beautiful musicality to history. So here, history won't be about blood and violence, it will be about music and the joy of the past, isn't it? And then, remember I told you I love like the clincher sentences? Therefore, Heaney expresses how history is not as rudimentary as simply being about violence, but is something we could also treasure and be appreciated. So I just want to emphasize there what she's done, and this is the job of the introduction, is she's got the tension going, the debate going between the readings, hasn't she? And then the essay, the main body, will be the exploration of that tension, and then the conclusion will answer it. Different rounder from politics, where we answer the question in the introduction. You don't have to do that in English. The main thing is to get the debate going, yeah? Okay, moving on then. So, remember before we spoke about whether you do a comparative at the beginning or whether you do the main poem? You can do either. In this case, Ruby's chosen in her topic sentence to talk about just the first poem. So she says, Heaney's A New Song can be seen either as a love song for the past or a whimsical ballad of Irish heritage. What's a ballad, guys? Like it's a song and it's almost always about love, the tragedy of love or something like that, okay? But she says it's whimsical, which usually means not really tragic, okay? But it is about emotion, it's about sentiment, etc. If you wanted to, Jodie, a couple of you have asked me about this, you could put a comparative up there. So you could have started with, whereas New Song does this, the other one does this, okay? You can do that. I prefer just focusing bang on poem 1, going really deep into it and doing a lot of your AO2. And I think that that's what Ruby does. you'll see right the way through I've highlighted the word history. I want to remind you guys to pepper your essay with the words from the question. You can use synonyms if you want. You might feel that it gets a bit repetitive. But you know what? It's better to be repetitive than it is not to use the language of the question. Just recently, my Year 12 class did an essay on the hidden connections. You know that, between people and the landscape. And they just did an essay on connections. Now, if you don't have that word concealed or hidden or something like that, that's disastrous. So look at the words of the question, and as you're writing, think, I will thread these through wherever I can. I'm signposting that I am looking at the question really carefully, and I've got focus on the question. And those words should come in the clincher sentence at the end of the paragraph. I'm not going to go through this too much, but you'll see here that what she does is she uses multiple quotations like blue, bolt, etc., and she's using them to show patterns of plosives. Just to remind you to use terminology, talk about plosives and susurration and sibilants and rotives and liquids, whatever kind of phonetic terms you use where they are useful, and also to think about things like rhyme, pararhyme, half rhyme, assonance, consonance. Heaney patterns all of his poems, even when he's not rhyming and even when he's not metering. He's patterning his poems with very carefully chosen assonance and consonants that give it a kind of rhythm, okay? And I also wanted to highlight, I like to see Heaney's name a lot. Why do we like to see the writer's name a lot? Because it will make you talk about how things are said, not what is said. So the poet's name will force you to talk about techniques more. So you can see that this is a good, sweaty paragraph. Most of it is the analysis bit, and that's what you should be aiming for as well. Really try and pick the quotations apart. And what I like that Ruby does, I know that some of you write about pre-modifying qualitative adjectives, etc. Well, 99% of adjectives in English are pre-modifying, and probably 95% are qualitative. I don't think it's actually saying anything. What would be better is to put an adjective in front of the adjective. So Ruby said the formidable adjective. Or if you said something like the haunting adjective. Because what really matters in the essays, more than the terminology, is your ability to see what the writer is doing to the reader and to explore the effects upon the reader. And don't forget, they may differ. You might say, you know, this was likely to have this effect on this reader. Don't forget things like race, color, gender, political ideology will mean that people read the poems in different ways. An English person reading Heaney will have a different cultural experience than an Irish person reading it, won't they? And that's something you can talk about. Now, what I think is very good in this essay, and just to remind you, remember I started off by talking about context? The context here is really good. It's not like you're writing a little mini history essay. It's completely integrated with the argument. The idea of seizing and colonizing history for the native people is evident here, and Heaney implies a stealing of history, again looking at the question, place and language, with the anatomical term river tongues, which portrays a sexual awakening, conveys how history gives way to maturation, as well as a metonym for language, alluding to how the British attempted to anglicize the original Irish names, replacing them with colonized names, which do not reflect the original lyricism and meaning which accompany these names. That's a big theme for Heaney. Do you remember when he hears the word Anahorish? It makes him remember the past. When he hears the Gaelic and he hears the girl from Derrygarth, he feels excited, erotically excited by his own language and history, etc. Very much a post-colonial theme, or even a colonial theme, you could say. Now, I'm going to not go on too much. I just wanted you to see, like, look, history, 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 history. You may think it's looking repetitive, but I would rather that, as I said to you, show the examiner that you are focused, razor focused on the question all the way through. Again, going on to the second page, because you can look at this at home more, she puts in a great deal of context here, but notice how the context is very nicely embedded. Now, what I'm going to move on to is the use of these comparative clincher parts to the essay. Have a look on the screen quickly here. Thus, and we love the word whilst in New Song, the overpowering message of history is one of expression and melody, giving shape to Heaney's present-day experiences of relationships. History is a device which elucidates the pain and misery oft suffered, offers no escape, as even the landscape which is so beautiful and enchanting in a new song is corrupted and tainted to reflect the violence and the conquest of history. Now, I actually don't agree with Ruby's reading. It's not one that I would have of a new song, but it's a really good and interesting way to end that paragraph and to bring the ideas together. Now note the flow, guys. Perhaps what is even more haunting in North is the indication that violence and conquest is never ending. Look at the coherence, the link is good between them, isn't it? Yeah? And again, when she comes to the end of this paragraph here, history is not simply an endless cycle of violence and conquest, but provides us with the cultural treasures and artful beauty here. Heaney resists violence, offering a potential resolution and escape from pain. So what Rubes does here is she actually uses North, which on the surface looks like it's going to agree with the title, don't you think? North looks like an endless cycle of pain and violence, but how can we use it to argue against it? We'll look at the end of it, which is all about retreating, do you remember, into your poetic imagination, embracing writing. He doesn't say it explicitly, but implicitly what's he saying? He's saying then you will not be tribal and violent and caught up in an endless cycle of barbarism. And I wanted you to see, so again, Jolie, if you look at this, when you start the paragraphs with the connective, simile, conversely, or in contrast, automatically you'll start to compare, won't you? Okay? So it's fine to mainly write one paragraph about one poem, as long as you clearly are linking in between the paragraphs and at some point doing a little bit of comparison, okay? Now, I think everyone's getting a bit bored, so I won't go on too long, but I'll just look at this conclusion. Ultimately is a nice adverb to use to finish. Heaney elucidates the past through his poetry and shows that history behind each of his poems, and to some extent this history is composed of violence. I like that term, to some extent. Remember, you're asked to what extent. So she's answering here, to some extent, okay? Well, you could say largely or often, you know what I mean? Or you could say rarely or seldom. History is composed of violence, land as well as language, yet he offers optimism for the future. He connotes how we possess the ability to change, and that through the arts as well as nature, history can be greatly beneficial. So she repeats the debate there. But then she ends by saying, Heaney portrays how history both illustrates the best and the worst elements of humanity. He showcases how history is a tool which allows us to tap into our past experiences in order to grow and develop ourselves. However, he also elucidates our current failure to learn from history. And then she says, therefore, Heaney does, in fact, reveal that history can be an unending cycle of violence and conquest, yet he also acknowledges the unquestionable beauty of the past, which history can show. And I think that's a nice way of ending, and to show that you can never, just reduce him to this one statement, okay? Remember that. You should never 100% agree with the statement or 100% disagree. There should be some kind of nuancing or hedging between the two positions.